The three of them, his father and brothers, stood arrogantly above him as he lay collapsed in the snow. One of his brothers sneered that crawling on the ground was exactly where he belonged. Pressing his hand into the freezing snow, Ash lifted his trembling voice and questioned why they had taken him in at all, if they intended to discard him anyway. Roderick bent down and coldly told him that he should stop deceiving himself, because he had never needed him from the very beginning. He roughly grabbed Ash's hair, yanking his head upward and forcing him to meet his contemptuous gaze before leaning closer to reveal the terrible truth. What he had truly needed was the power of the seven wings, sleeping within Ash's body. Ash's eyes widened in shock as he repeated the words seven wings in disbelief. Roderick's cruel smile deepened as he claimed that Ash's mother had been very useful to him. He shamelessly boasted that she had only borne Ash as the seed he required for his own benefit. The last thing Ash remembered was himself screaming desperately while demanding answers from Roderick. As cold blades pierced through his body, his consciousness slowly faded, leaving behind only a bone-chilling cold as his hands sank into the snow. In that final moment, he wondered in despair whether this was truly the end of his fate. If so, then what meaning had his entire life ever held? Suddenly, a pale and gentle warmth enveloped him, and for a fleeting second, he thought he had reached the afterlife until he realized it was snow. He felt someone holding him in their arms, a foreign warmth that was strangely tender. His eyes flew open wide. No, this was not a dream. It was reality. Confused, he wondered where he was as he lay beneath the falling snow. Horror struck him when he noticed how small his body was. Staring at his tiny hands, he questioned whether they truly belonged to him. They were not merely similar. They were the hands of a newborn child, and he was being cradled in someone's arms. He looked at the woman holding him, and noticed that she appeared to have just breathed her last, making him wonder if she was already dead. Suddenly, an unfamiliar voice echoed through his mind, commanding him to seek her. In a vision, he saw knights galloping through the snowstorm while declaring that she could not have gone far. One of them shouted that by order of Duke Roderick, they had to recover the child she had taken at any cost. The vision vanished, leaving him stunned and unable to comprehend what had just happened. He remained frozen in place as the snow continued to fall around him. Then he suddenly remembered the name that had been spoken, Duke Roderick. Horror dawned on him as he realized that the people searching for the newborn were actually searching for him. The memory of being found during a raging snowstorm resurfaced in his mind, and a wild suspicion began to take root. Had he returned to the past? He tried to push the thought aside when strange flashes of light flickered before his eyes, interrupting his reflection. Though he still could not fully believe it, he decided to set the question aside for now and focus on the immediate danger. One thing was certain. If he remained there, he would once again fall into the hands of the cruel Duke. With the will of a seasoned warrior, he forced his fragile newborn body to crawl out of the cold arms of the woman who had already lost her warmth. Suddenly, a surge of golden energy burst from within him, driving his desperate resolve to flee as far away as possible. The heat from his tiny hands melted the thick snow wherever he touched it, yet the body of a newborn soon reached its limit. He collapsed into the snow, feeling his breathing grow heavier and more strained. Amid the biting cold, his limbs burned as though consumed by fire. A long trail of melted water marked his path across the white ground, but he could barely drag himself any farther. Even so, his eyes shone with unyielding determination. No matter what, he swore that he would survive. The image of his ruthless father turning his back on him resurfaced, planting a vow of vengeance deep within his heart. Clenching his teeth and pouring every ounce of hatred into his glowing hands, he swore that Roderick would pay for everything. With the last of his strength, the tiny newborn crawled with astonishing persistence, carving a long mark across the snow until, completely exhausted, he collapsed at the feet of a figure who had just appeared. A little girl pointed excitedly at the motionless child and called out to her father in delight. The man known as Viscount Highfried could not hide his shock at the sight before him. Gently, he picked up the baby, wondering how such a child could possibly have ended up in a place like this. Feeling the safety and warmth of the man's embrace, the child drifted into sleep. Viscount Highfried stared in astonishment at the strange newborn in his arms. His eyes traced the long trail left behind in the snow, and he could scarcely believe that a baby could have traveled such a distance alone. Looking down at the sleeping child, he could not help but wonder about the boy's true identity. When Ash awoke again, he found himself in a warm room far removed from the raging storm outside. Still drowsy, he questioned where he was. Suddenly, an illusion appeared before him, showing a boy with hair as red as fire reaching out his hand as though trying to take him away. Just as abruptly, a gentle pinch on his cheek pulled him out of the vision. 4 charming little girls surrounded him, and one of them excitedly announced to the eldest sister that the baby had awakened. While the eldest sister scolded the others not to ruin the baby's pretty nose, the veteran warrior, now trapped inside the helpless body of an infant, could do nothing as he found himself surrounded and handled by the lively girls. Unable to understand what was happening, he struggled helplessly in their midst. Fortunately, the eldest sister, a girl with platinum hair, rescued him from the others' clutches. Even so, he curled up in her lap with suspicion in his eyes. Suddenly, with the will of an adult trapped inside him, he attempted to stand and free himself from the girl's arms. But his fragile newborn body betrayed him at once, causing him to fall face first onto the floor and shock everyone in the room. One of the girls cried out in alarm, unable to comprehend what on earth was happening. Startled and frustrated, Ash began crawling frantically while wondering why the girls were chasing after him and shouting for him to stop. The comical pursuit ended only when his tiny body could no longer endure the effort, and he was finally caught. Viscount Highfried scooped him up just in time and remarked in astonishment that he truly was a strange child for having fallen from the sky like that. Ash's eyes widened as he froze the moment he recognized the man holding him. This was Viscount Highfried, the brother of Duke Roderick. Shocked, he looked around at his surroundings and wondered whether this place was another residence of the Elmsheim family. Elmsheim, lord of the Viscount's house and head of a lesser branch of the Elmsheim family, had once stood alongside his brother Roderick. They were known as the Twin Wings, the two right hands entrusted with protecting the royal family. Yet in the memories Ash carried from his previous life, Viscount Highfried had died tragically during a civil war, bringing about the downfall of his entire house. Seeing Viscount Highfried alive and standing before him, Ash could finally be certain that he truly had returned to the past. Even so, he could not help clutching his head at the bitter irony. In trying to escape the Duke's household, he had fallen directly into the hands of his own brother. Meanwhile, Viscount Highfried, who still held him gently, speculated that perhaps the child's magic had gone out of control and caused him to fly. Convinced that he was no ordinary baby, his wife looked at Ash with tender eyes and a warm smile completely unlike the cruelty he remembered. She hugged him softly, comforting him and assuring him that he must have been very frightened, but that everything would be all right now. For the first time in both of his lives, Ash felt the warmth of a mother's embrace, leaving him stunned and speechless. From a short distance away, Viscount Highfried smiled in quiet satisfaction as he watched the scene. He stepped closer and declared that the child harbored extraordinary power and that the mark on his body was the clearest proof. As Viscount Highfried lifted the baby's sleeve before a mirror, a bright red mark came into view. The Viscount gasped in horror and whispered in disbelief that the mark was the 7 wings. Ash immediately went rigid, unable to understand why the mark of the 7 wings had appeared on his body. At that very moment, fragments of dreadful memories from his previous life surged back like crashing waves. He fully awakened to the truth. Roderick's words echoed endlessly in his mind. What he had truly needed was the power of the 7 wings hidden within Ash's body. From the very beginning, he had never intended to raise him as a son. He had taken him in for one purpose only, to steal the 7 wings, and yet he had still dared to call him wingless. After having his own wings torn away in his previous life, anger erupted in Ash's heart like a blazing fire. Back in the present, noticing the sudden change in his expression, Viscount Highfried spoke with concern before turning to his wife and asking what they intended to do with the child. Hearing this, Ash inwardly realized that the situation was becoming extremely dangerous. He could not allow this power to fall into the hands of the Elmsheim family once again. He needed it for himself. He needed it to take revenge on that man. Then, without hesitation, Viscount Highfried made a decision. He declared that he would adopt the child, causing Ash to lift his gaze in shock. Stunned by such an unexpected and unbelievable statement, Ash watched as Viscount Highfried slowly extended his hand without the slightest trace of malice in his eyes. He gently patted the boy's head and explained that the child was still a little bird who could not yet fly on his own, and that he would raise him until the day he could spread his wings and soar freely. Something complex flickered within Ash's glassy eyes before quietly fading away. This kind of kindness was something he had never experienced before. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the room. One of Viscount Highfried's daughters, who had been secretly eavesdropping outside the door, had fallen over. The Viscount turned sharply and sternly questioned whether 2 of his daughters had been listening in, but it turned out that it was not just 2. All 4 sisters had been stacked together in a clumsy pile after collapsing on top of one another. The eldest daughter awkwardly stood up, scratching her head while explaining that they had simply been too worried about the baby. Amid the warm family atmosphere, a red-haired girl looked curiously at her mother. Pointing at the newborn in her arms, she excitedly asked what his name would be. Viscount Highfried smiled gently as she gazed tenderly at the child, lifting him slightly beneath the soft glow of the moonlight. She gave him the name Aster, saying that it meant a new star had been born into their family. Time passed swiftly. 10 years later, within a splendid mansion, Viscount Highfried, now visibly older, arrived and was greeted by a soldier's respectful bow. Behind him, a nimble young attendant stepped forward to open the door of a luxurious carriage. It was Aster. The once helpless infant had grown into a handsome and elegant young man as he descended from the vehicle. Turning politely, he extended his hand to help a red-haired girl step down, while gently reminding Miss Alphine to be careful. The young lady smiled brightly and thanked Aster, and for a brief moment, the mischievous expression she had worn during childhood resurfaced in his memory. Aster watched his sister Alphine's back with quiet affection, his gaze carrying maturity and confidence. Together they walked toward the venue of an important event. They were heading to the Sword Dance Festival, an annual gathering hosted by the Duke House of Elmsheim for noble knight families. On the surface, it was an occasion meant to strengthen ties among the nobility, but in truth, it was also a ruthless arena of rivalry between houses. Each family presented the strength of their young swordsmen, who carried the honor of their entire lineage upon their shoulders. The moment Aster and Alphine entered the grand hall, every gaze turned toward them. Whispers rippled through the crowd as mocking comments slowly began to rise. Voices laced with subtle disdain spread throughout the hall, as the nobles spoke of how the Viscount's house had come only to humiliate itself. They mocked the family for adopting a brat of unknown origin instead of producing a proper heir. Among the crowd, hostile and malicious glances questioned how far the Viscount's family intended to tarnish the reputation of the Elmsheim name. Aster stood still with his gaze fixed upon the imposing castle before him, lost in thought. Noticing his silence, Alphine anxiously squeezed his hand and told him not to pay attention to the cruel whispers surrounding them. Clenching her teeth, she firmly explained that in a place like this, anyone who showed weakness would be crushed first. Aster remained quiet as he calmly surveyed the hostility surrounding them without the slightest change in expression. Behind him, Viscount Hyfryd spoke in a low and steady voice, explaining that this was the current standing of their house. Standing before the majestic ducal castle, he explained that he wanted Aster to witness this harsh reality with his own eyes. Then he turned toward his son and asked whether he felt disappointed. Aster slightly turned his head as a confident and faintly defiant smile curved across his lips. He calmly replied that he was not disappointed at all, and that the atmosphere actually suited him perfectly. Hearing his son's firm answer, Viscount Hyfryd burst into proud laughter, clearly at ease. Suddenly, painful memories from Aster's previous life flooded back into his mind. The shame of his house being utterly defeated in humiliation resurfaced vividly. This very place had once been the stage of his greatest disgrace, a hall filled with bitter memories. But now, after regaining the Seven Wings, everything was different. A flame of determination burned within his golden eyes, signaling that revenge was finally about to begin. Standing beside his father and sister Alphine, Aster lifted his gaze toward the towering ducal castle, a structure burdened with the weight of his painful past. From above, the two half-brothers from his former life looked down upon him with arrogance and contempt. Despite their humiliating stares, Aster's expression remained perfectly composed. Beneath his fringe rested an extraordinary calmness. Now was the time to step forward with dignity and face everything. Confidence gleamed in Aster's eyes as he silently thought that it was time to make a spectacular entrance. Inside the grand hall, an intense fencing competition unfolded upon the central stage, capturing the full attention of the gathered nobles. In an era where knights reigned supreme, they were expected to embody both overwhelming power and noble grandeur. Power was displayed through masterful swordsmanship, while grandeur stemmed from the fame and standing of one's house. At the center of the hall, two young swordsmen clashed in a fierce duel, their movements overflowing with explosive energy. They charged toward one another and closed the distance instantly for a decisive collision. What followed was the perfect embodiment of strength and splendor, the manifestation of magical energy itself. With a single precise strike, one combatant shattered his opponent's sword into pieces. The defeated youth's face froze in disbelief just before he collapsed. The victor proudly rose, revealing the absolute symbol of his family's lineage, the wing emblem. On the back of his hand, the emblem of the two wings glowed with a bluish light, irrefutable proof of his power. From the balcony above, Aster watched the scene in silence, his gaze steady and unreadable as he maintained perfect composure. He inwardly admitted that this place was just as intimidating as it had always been. It was no wonder his other sisters had firmly refused to attend such a hostile gathering. Ignoring the mocking stares that he recognized all too well from his previous life, Aster's resolve hardened like steel. A bitter memory continued to haunt him, the image of his humiliating defeat within this very hall. Noticing that his gaze had drifted far away, Alphine gently called his name with genuine concern. She carefully asked whether he was nervous since this was his first sword dance festival. However, Aster smiled with unusual confidence and explained that he was not nervous at all. If anything, the place simply felt nostalgic to him. His strange answer left Alphine completely confused, unable to understand what he truly meant. At that moment, Viscount Hyfryd excused himself, explaining that he needed to attend a conference before entrusting Aster with taking care of Alphine. Indignant, Alphine protested and reminded her father that she was actually 1 year older than Aster. Aster lightly teased her, saying that she was far too clumsy to be trusted alone. Viscount Hyfryd placed a hand on Aster's shoulder and advised him to take advantage of the opportunity to make connections since many young nobles his age were present. Then, lowering his voice, he seriously warned him not to let anyone discover the truth about the Seven Wings. As the Viscount walked away, Aster fell into deep thought while carefully weighing his adoptive father's warning. Yet the looks directed toward him from every corner of the hall were filled with barely concealed hostility. He realized that in such an openly unfriendly atmosphere, forming connections as his father had suggested would be nearly impossible. But instead of shrinking back, a cold determination settled into his golden eyes. When Alphine noticed him walking away, she anxiously asked where he was going. Without even turning around, Aster calmly answered that he was simply going to make some friends. With steady strides, he descended the grand staircase and headed directly toward a group of young nobles chatting on a sofa. The red-haired youth leading the group looked at him with disdain before demanding to know who he was. Aster bowed slightly with a confident smile and politely greeted him as Brother Dallas. He then formally introduced himself as Aster Elmin and declared that he was Dallas's younger brother. Dallas stared at him in astonishment. Casually, Aster added that he had spotted him from outside and decided to stop by and greet him personally. Another young man named Grion leaned toward Dallas and explained that this was the adopted boy whom the Viscount's house had taken in. Dallas immediately burst into mocking laughter, finally understanding why this brat had the audacity to call himself an Elmin. At that instant, memories of his past death flooded Aster's mind once again. He recognized them immediately. Dallas and Grion, the two heirs of House Elmsheim, were the very people who had killed him in his previous life. Back then, they had cast enormous shadows over his heart and seemed terrifying beyond measure. But now, as he looked at them beneath the bright lights of the hall, they appeared to be nothing more than children pretending to wield power. Sensing the tension, Alphine quickly grabbed Aster by the arm and called out to him with concern. She attempted to pull him away while insisting that he had already greeted them and that it was time to leave. Dallas's mocking voice suddenly stopped her as he addressed her with unwanted familiarity. With a sneer, he questioned whether she was still hiding behind her father again today before arrogantly ordering both of them to come closer and entertain him, declaring it an order from the main house. Alphine froze instantly, her back stiffening as she stood facing away from them. Her body trembled with tension while her eyes burned with fury at the humiliating command. She flatly refused and firmly declared that there was no master-servant relationship between the main house and their branch family. Just as she was about to step forward and act, Aster swiftly caught her wrist and stopped her from making a reckless move. Holding her firmly, he calmly explained that he had not finished speaking yet. His composed profile stood in sharp contrast to the charged atmosphere as he concealed his true intentions beneath a mask of serenity. Seeing this, Dallas's lips twisted into a sadistic grin as he decided to pour even more fuel onto the fire. He openly mocked Alphine, reminding everyone that her father, despite being a knight, had failed to protect the king, and that, as punishment, his own younger brother had cut off his arm. Each cruel word struck Alphine like a lash, forcing her to lower her head in humiliation and pain. Dallas continued mercilessly, declaring how grateful he was that he did not carry the blood of such a loser within his veins. Unable to endure the insult any longer, Alphine finally erupted in fury and demanded that he take back his words. With an angry shout, Alphine declared that she would never allow anyone to insult her father. Yet even after she lowered her head, Dallas continued his verbal assault, cruelly mocking that only useless daughters had been born into her family, girls who could never inherit a title, and that her father must surely be disappointed in them. With a vicious smile, he lifted his wineglass and reminded her that this was not a dance floor. Then he suddenly flung the wine at her, staining her dress. Grion mockingly advised her to wear rags next time so she would not have to worry about getting soaked. At that very moment, Aster stepped forward. On his way there, he had wondered whether seeing their faces again would leave him feeling nothing at all. No anger and no resentment. With a smooth motion, he snatched a bottle of wine from a startled noble standing nearby. But the moment he saw his sister standing there humiliated, her eyes brimming with tears while her bruised cheek bled faintly, he felt an unexpected sense of relief. At the very least, he realized that he could still feel anger. Calmly, he called out Dallas's name before tossing the wine bottle into the air with a provocative flick of his wrist. Just as the bottle was about to smash into Dallas's head, it suddenly halted in midair. Aster looked at him with open contempt and declared that they were still the same pieces of trash as ever. With a subtle movement of his hand, the suspended bottle transformed into a weapon ready to strike. In the next instant, it shattered violently, drenching the utterly stunned Dallas from head to toe in red wine. Aster then stood upright with chilling composure while the nobles around him stared in shock. Grion screamed Dallas's name in panic while Aster casually wiped a drop of liquid from his lips and remarked that it was only grape juice. With a twisted and contemptuous smile, he added that it was the perfect drink for noble babies like them. Naturally, they refused to believe him. Suddenly, a memory from 3 years earlier crashed into Aster's mind. He remembered an explosion of golden energy and his father's desperate voice shouting for him to control it. Amid the chaos, one of his sisters held another unconscious girl in her arms while crying through tears and begging him to stop before he killed them all. His eldest sister had desperately pleaded for him to regain control as spirals of dark and golden power coiled violently around him. He remembered the terrifying power of the Seven Wings, a force so dangerous that even he barely understood it. The image of his father surfaced in his thoughts, his face filled with worry as he questioned whether Aster would ever truly master such overwhelming power. Aster also remembered his own suffering, the energy tearing through his body while his father wondered whether either of them could endure it. Meanwhile, an attendant burst into the conference hall and shouted that something terrible had happened. The Viscount immediately interrupted and sternly demanded what could possibly be so urgent during such an important meeting. The attendant hurriedly explained in panic that the children of the main house and the Elming branch family had become involved in a duel. The Viscount and the Duke exchanged tense glances. Instantly, the Viscount leapt to his feet and rushed out of the hall, his cape billowing behind him. When he reached the balcony, he found a distressed Alphine running toward him while crying out for her father. Alarmed, he urgently questioned what had happened. Nearby, a broad man with a shark-like smile pointed toward the arena below while commenting excitedly that a fight between the great Elming brothers was underway, something rarely seen. The Viscount and Alphine leaned forward and saw Dallas facing Aster alone in the arena. The man added that depending on how the battle ended, the consequences could be enormous, a thought that visibly unsettled the surrounding nobles. With a sinister grin, the red-eyed man predicted that the dance of swords was about to turn ugly. Inside the arena, Dallas unleashed his power and fury while shouting that some fool had dared to provoke the Duke's house. He insulted Aster by calling him nothing more than a stray dog who did not understand the difference in power between them. Between the two fighters, the emblem of 4 wings on Dallas's hand glowed with a blue light, and the crowd murmured in awe, claiming that the Duke's son truly stood on an entirely different level. Pressing the tip of his sword close to Aster's face, Dallas smirked and demanded that Aster reveal his own wing emblem. He mockingly questioned whether Aster was too ashamed to display it after witnessing his power. However, Aster calmly replied that Dallas was right, and that boasting about a mere pattern truly was embarrassing. With a faint half-smile resting on his lips, he remained completely unmoved before him. Aster then added that he could never bring himself to behave in something so vulgar, A vein throbbed violently across Dallas's forehead as humiliation burned through him at Aster's unexpected insolence. Aster then calmly stated his condition. He declared that if he won, Dallas would apologize to Alphine. Dallas immediately accepted and countered with his own cruel condition, declaring that if he won, Aster would become his personal dog and work for him until he collapsed. Without another word, Dallas lunged forward with frightening speed. Their swords collided in a shower of golden sparks, the sharp clash echoing throughout the arena and signaling the beginning of a duel that was far more than a simple display. Aster shifted into a firm combat stance, his sword steady in his grip as dust and swirling wind gathered around him. His golden eyes sharpened with focus while his hand tightened around the hilt in preparation for the coming assault. Dallas, wearing a smile of superiority, unleashed his own magical energy and arrogantly declared that this was the true power of someone who actually possessed a wing emblem. With a furious shout, he launched a barrage of swift and crushing slashes that tore through the air, each strike carving powerful gusts of cutting wind in its wake. From the balcony, Alphine screamed Aster's name, her face turning pale from terror at the sheer ferocity of the attack. The broad man beside her merely smirked and remarked that young Master Dallas's swordsmanship was still immature. Even so, Dallas's overwhelming magical power more than compensated for any technical flaws. A violent surge of energy erupted from him, proving the terrifying advantage possessed by those who bore winged emblems. In his arrogance, Dallas believed that if one wing contained the magic of a candle flame, then his four wings represented a true explosion. Flames burst outward in a relentless storm of blazing strikes. He mocked Aster continuously while forcing him backward, questioning where all the boldness from earlier had disappeared. Yet Aster remained completely unshaken by the onslaught. With calm and precise movements, he blocked every single strike with frightening composure. Dallas sneered and taunted him further, asking whether he no longer intended to force an apology or whether all his earlier confidence had simply been empty words. With a furious roar, Dallas demanded that Aster reveal his true power before pouring every ounce of energy into one final strike. From the stands, a mustached noble smugly declared that the match had already been decided, but Aster answered by finally releasing his own aura. Instantly, his sword shined with radiance. The two forces collided in a massive explosion of red and golden energy. Dallas's face twisted in disbelief, unable to comprehend how his ultimate strike had been stopped so effortlessly. Aster offered him a faint half-smile and calmly remarked that he talked far too much. With one smooth and elegant motion, Aster knocked Dallas's blade aside before delivering a spinning kick that sent him flying violently across the arena. Aster landed lightly upon the ground, his body now wrapped in tendrils of golden energy while displaying a level of control Dallas could never hope to achieve. For 10 long years within the Viscount's household, Aster had trained endlessly to master his magic while patiently waiting for the day he could finally claim his revenge. That day had finally come. With a single slash, Aster released a surge of power that tore through the air. Golden light erupted as the arena trembled beneath the impact. The force from his blade exploded and sent Dallas flying backward, completely unable to withstand the attack. He crashed onto the ground, his knees striking the floor with a crack as he struggled to stand once again. In the distance, his brother Griot stared in disbelief, shocked that Dallas was pushed back and overwhelmed by the green and gold energy surrounding Aster. Dallas's face twisted in horror as he struggled to be cooked. He shouted that he possessed 4 wings, unable to accept the reality before him. Yet Aster remained completely chill guy. Golden energy flowed across the edge of his sword as he condensed all of his strength into a single point with one decisive movement. The rich kid spectators gasped in shock as the duel continued to unfold before their eyes. Some wondered aloud if Aster could truly take the dub, while others pointed out that Dallas was already being completely dominated. Then another violent burst of golden energy erupted from Aster's blade, sealing the outcome of the battle. Murmurs spread rapidly through the crowd as they realized the Elmine family still possessed someone with such terrifying power. However, Aster's aura only intensified further. Dark tendrils slowly seeped from his body as his energy climbed to an even more frightening level. From the balcony, the Viscount frowned deeply and muttered that the situation was becoming dangerous. Dallas trembled under the crushing pressure pouring from Aster's body. Suddenly, a traumatic memory from Aster's previous life resurfaced in his mind. He remembered one of his brothers severing his arm while laughing madly, the cruel sound echoing endlessly in his ears. Back in the present, golden and dark energy exploded violently from Aster's body as rage consumed him completely. Dallas desperately screamed curses while trying to resist the overwhelming force pressing down on him. From above, Alphine cried out in panic and begged her Nichan to stop, but it was already too late. The power of the 7 wings fully erupted, unleashing a massive explosion that carved a gigantic crater into the center of the arena. When the dust finally settled, the broad man stood with his arms crossed and a grave expression on his face. Aster's sword had stopped only inches away from Dallas's terrified face, embedded deeply into the ground. Seated helplessly on the floor, Dallas could do nothing except listen as Aster calmly returned his own yappings back to him. Aster advised that next time he should wear rags so he would not have to worry about getting wet. Afterward, Aster turned away and sheathed his sword with quiet confidence. He reminded himself that he was no longer the wingless failure everyone once mocked. From the balcony, Alphine watched him with relief and awe, while her heart continued pounding violently. Aster allowed himself a faint smile, knowing his sister was finally safe for now. That alone was enough to steady his mind. Suddenly, his golden eye flickered with traces of red as he sensed a new presence nearby. A figure wrapped in dark crimson energy descended heavily from above and landed in the center of the hall. Aster's expression sharpened instantly as he recognized the ominous newcomer. Standing at the top of the grand staircase was an imposing man. Duke Roderick had arrived. The spectators continued whispering in disbelief, unable to comprehend that the Viscount's youngest son had just defeated the third son of the main house. However, the atmosphere quickly turned grim because everyone understood that the main house would never ignore such public humiliation. Duke Roderick, the eighth leader of the main house, slowly descended the staircase while Dallas looked up at him with fear and relief, believing his father had come to save him. Aster, however, remained completely still. His eyes locked onto the man responsible for all the suffering and hatred buried deep inside him. The Duke silently surveyed the scene while an overwhelming aura of hostility spread through the hall. Aster immediately recognized him as the same man who had betrayed and killed him in his previous life. Despite the suffocating pressure filling the room, Dallas crawled desperately toward his father and grabbed onto his leg. Pointing at Aster with hatred-filled eyes, he insulted him as a mangy dog who dared challenge the main house and begged his father to punish him. Instead of helping his son, Roderick slammed over Dallas's arm. A horrifying scream echoed throughout the hall as bones cracked beneath the immense pressure. The young nobles stared in horror, unable to understand the Duke's cruelty toward his own child. Griot's face lost all color as he witnessed the brutal scene unfold before him. Roderick looked down at his defeated son with contempt and questioned why he was grinning like an idiot after disgracing the family. From the balcony, Highfridge desperately pleaded for Roderick to stop, but the Duke ignored him completely. He declared that anyone incapable of avenging themselves had no right to wield a sword. As he slowly raised his hand again, the grand hall fell into complete silence. Dallas trembled helplessly on the floor while humiliation and terror consumed him entirely. Yet Duke Roderick's fiercest fury was not directed at Dallas, but toward Aster standing before him. Pointing his sword directly at Aster, the Duke demanded to know what he thought he was doing. Aster did not flinch in the slightest. Calmly, he answered that Dallas had not yet apologized to his sister. Then, with astonishing boldness, he asked whether the punishment could wait until after the apology had been given. Wrapped in a menacing purple aura, Roderick laughed mockingly and questioned whether being a stray orphan taken in by the family had made Aster believe he truly belonged among the Elmines. Aster stood firm and declared that he was still the Viscount's son. He explained that his father had taught him the pride of a knight and the responsibility that came with carrying a family name, even without sharing its blood. The Duke fell silent for a brief moment as flames erupted around him. He accused Aster of tarnishing the reputation of the main house, the very pride that stood above 12,000 knights. From the balcony, the broad man remarked that the main house should understand that better than anyone else. Beside him, a young man with light blue hair commented with a faint smile that the matter could no longer be dismissed as a simple quarrel between children. Another noble gravely reminded everyone that the Duke's own father once demanded an arm as punishment for disloyalty. At that moment, the sharp edge of Duke Roderick's sword pressed coldly against Aster's throat. The Duke demanded to know what Aster intended to offer in exchange. Aster answered evenly that the battle had not been a sibling dispute but a legitimate duel. He explained that he had merely answered insults directed toward his house with his blade. The Duke's eyes burned with fury as Aster repeated his own words back to him, declaring that anyone incapable of avenging themselves had no right to wield a sword. Aster firmly stated that he had no intention of surrendering even a single finger. Above them, Alphine trembled anxiously while the broad man gently patted her head in an attempt to calm her down. The blue-haired youth chuckled in disbelief, remarking that Aster was only 10 years old and that the entire situation had to be some kind of joke. Roderick remained silent while the crimson glow in his eye dangerously. Eventually, he slowly drew his sword and declared that he understood everything clearly enough. With a commanding voice, he ordered Aster to draw his blade. Aster hesitated briefly, clearly not expecting the Duke himself to interfere. Before he could properly react, the ground beneath him exploded apart and an invisible force hurled him into the air. The Duke's sword crashed into the spot where Aster had been standing only a moment earlier, releasing a shockwave throughout the hall. Alphine nearly screamed as terror filled her eyes at the overwhelming display of power. Highfridge shouted his brother's name furiously before leaping down from the balcony to stand between Aster and the Duke. Blue light erupted from his twin swords as the weapons of the two brothers collided in a violent shower of sparks. At last, the leaders of the two houses had begun their duel. The impact of their clash thundered throughout the great hall, revealing the enormous difference in power between ordinary warriors and the heads of noble families. The Viscount quickly rushed beside Aster and urgently asked if he was injured. The Viscount's expression filled with both concern and surprise after seeing the destructive force of the attack. Aster slowly pushed himself back to his feet despite the bruises covering his body and the blood running down from his forehead. Even so, his spirit remained completely unshaken as fury and determination burned fiercely within his eyes. Meanwhile, Duke Roderick observed everything with a faint smile, seemingly satisfied with how Vince had matured. Without saying another word, he turned away from the confrontation and calmly walked back toward the stairs. With a swift leap, he landed beside his defeated son on the balcony, abandoning the battle entirely. The hall itself had already been left scarred by destruction, while lingering shockwaves continued shaking the surroundings. The Viscount silently watched the Duke leave, before placing a protective hand on Astor's shoulder and firmly standing beside him. The Viscount remained visibly shaken while supporting the injured Astor in his arms and repeatedly calling his name in concern. Despite the injuries covering his body, Astor managed to smile and assured his father that he had successfully protected both his promise and the honor of their family. Relief and pride immediately appeared on the Viscount's face as he praised his son's performance. Meanwhile, Duke Roderick withdrew alongside his defeated child, leaving behind an atmosphere filled with tension. A broad man approached the Duke with a faint smile and remarked that his reaction earlier had been childish. Roderick coldly explained that allowing Astor to continue speaking freely would have completely destroyed the reputation of the main house. Womp womp. According to him, his actions had simply been the most reasonable compromise possible. Elsewhere, the nobles whispered among themselves in amazement. Astor had boldly challenged Duke Roderick himself, and survived, instantly establishing himself as a rising star among the nobility. One mustached noble admitted that although the possibility of the Elmhine family dividing unsettled him, Astor could not have asked for a more successful social debut. Hidden within the shadows, another duke silently observed everything with a grim expression, fully aware that a massive era of upheaval was rapidly approaching. Back with his family, Astor was immediately greeted by Alphine's worried embrace, while his father proudly supported him. Blood still stained his face, yet a victorious smile remained visible. Astor himself seemed momentarily speechless after everything that had happened. The scene then shifted toward the training arena belonging to the Viscount House of Elmhine. Several knights stood nearby as a sparring session unfolded. One knight smiled casually while praising his master's swordsmanship and calling the performance splendid. The warrior receiving the praise was none other than Astor himself. The surrounding knights quietly remarked among themselves that Astor's swordsmanship was terrifying for someone his age. They noted that his training had become far more intense after the sword dance assembly. One knight recalled how Astor had defeated the third son of the Elmhine family, and the others could not hide their satisfaction. The main family had looked down upon the Viscount branch for years, so seeing one of their own stand proudly against them felt incredibly refreshing. As Astor continued defeating opponent after opponent, his thoughts drifted back toward the sword dance assembly. He understood that he had displayed enough power to silence everyone who once mocked his family as a disgrace to House Elmhine. Even so, he knew the real challenges still remained ahead of him, especially the Elmhine main house itself. Part of him wished he could have fought even more opponents during the gathering to test his limits further. Despite his growth, he clearly understood that he currently stood no chance of defeating Roderick Elmhine. To Astor, the wing crest itself was merely proof of magical potential, because raw talent meant nothing without proper mastery over it. Even now, he still could not fully control the power of the seven wings. If he no longer had to fear losing control and going berserk, he believed he could finally discover the true limits of his strength. With one final exchange, Astor defeated the last remaining knight. Several exhausted warriors now lay scattered across the training grounds. Astor calmly looked around and asked if anyone else wished to challenge him. Before another knight could respond, a familiar voice interrupted the training session. Alphine appeared and remarked that Astor was once again pushing himself far beyond his limits. She questioned whether he even understood the meaning of rest, before informing him that their father wanted to see him immediately. Astor quickly agreed and stated that he would head there right away. As they walked together, Astor noticed Alphine's outfit and commented on how unusual it looked on her. Alphine appeared confused at first, not understanding his meaning. Astor explained that she rarely wore that outfit because she used to dislike it for not being cute enough. Alphine responded that balance in life was important and admitted that watching Astor constantly improve had made her realize she could not remain unchanged forever either. Her words briefly caught Astor off guard, especially after she confidently pointed her training sword toward him with a smile. She declared that once he returned, they would spend much more time training together. Grinning in response, Astor accepted the challenge and politely asked her to go easy on him afterward. Some time later, Astor arrived at his father's office. After entering the room, the Viscount instructed him to sit down. Astor silently complied and took a seat across from his father with a serious expression on his face. Hyfred remarked that 10 years had already passed since Astor officially became part of their family. He admitted that he once considered waiting until Astor became older, but he now believed it was finally time to move forward. Slowly, he placed a small case onto the desk. Inside rested a ring. Hyfred revealed that the ring represented succession and symbolized the future head of the Viscount house. He then openly declared his intention to make Astor his successor. Astor immediately froze in complete shock after hearing those words. The Viscount calmly explained that he truly wanted Astor to inherit the house. As Astor already understood, the Branch family currently existed in a delicate political position. Despite everything, they still carried the Elmhine name and had responsibilities as rulers of their territory. With the burden of their lineage weighing heavily upon him, the Viscount explained that the position of heir could not remain empty forever. Astor's first concern immediately turned toward his sisters. He questioned whether they would truly accept such an important decision without resistance. The Viscount explained that his older daughters, who were currently studying at the Knights Academy, would return within 3 days, and that he planned to announce everything once the family reunited. Aster instantly pictured Marfa and Kudo, two powerful figures who would definitely not react kindly to the news. Kudo in particular would likely become furious. The Viscount quietly explained that Kudo disliked Aster simply because he had been born with the 7 wings. Hearing that explanation caused Aster's expression to harden immediately. With firm determination, he declared that he could not accept becoming the successor. Turning slightly away, he admitted that he still could not fully control his own magic, and described himself as an immature fool who had nearly killed his own sister. Within the quiet study, Aster confessed that someone like him lacked the confidence to persuade an angry sibling, much less carry the burden of leading an entire house. Because of that, he refused the honor completely. The Viscount quietly listened while a faint smile slowly appeared on his face. After a long silence, he admitted that he often questioned whether Aster was truly a child at all, because of how mature he sounded. Ignoring the refusal for the moment, the Viscount opened a long wooden box resting nearby. He explained that he originally intended to reward Aster after the sword dance assembly with the succession ring, but perhaps this item would make him happier instead. The moment Aster looked inside the box, his eyes widened in complete disbelief. He immediately asked what the weapon was. The Viscount revealed that it was the Devouring Magic Sword, a legendary blade capable of controlling the power of the 7 wings. Later, inside a secluded forest clearing, the Viscount announced that the area would be suitable for testing the weapon. Confused, Aster questioned why they had traveled so far simply to test a sword. The Viscount casually replied that it was merely a precaution before joking that Aster had a habit of destroying everything around him. He then properly introduced the weapon known as Graham, explaining that it was a legendary blade passed down only to the firstborn heirs of the Elmhine family. The Viscount explained that he personally retrieved the weapon from the main house, specifically for Aster. With a swift motion, he drew the sword from its sheath. Aster stared at the weapon in confusion, because it appeared to have no actual blade attached to the hilt. Smiling faintly, the Viscount explained that the sword completed itself through magic. The moment mana was channeled into it, a crimson ethereal blade would manifest from the handle. As he demonstrated, a glowing red spectral edge burst forth instantly, leaving Aster speechless in amazement. The Viscount described it as a true blade of power that responded directly to the wielder's magic itself. With one casual swing, he unleashed a massive shockwave that tore through the forest. Trees split apart instantly while wind and debris exploded outward, displaying the terrifying strength hidden within the weapon. However, the Viscount warned that anyone with mediocre magical power would quickly be drained dry by the sword, making it a devouring blade in every sense of the word. Holding the glowing crimson hilt toward Aster, he asked whether his son wished to try wielding it himself. Without hesitation, Aster grasped the weapon as his hands closed over his father's in a symbolic moment of trust. The instant his fingers touched the hilt, his magic reacted violently. Golden energy erupted around him while countless tendrils of power intertwined directly with the sword itself. His mana poured uncontrollably into the weapon, creating a violent storm of energy, powerful enough to shake the surroundings. The overwhelming sensation stole his breath entirely. Back at the training grounds, a massive beam of crimson light suddenly pierced into the heavens, leaving everyone staring upward in shock. One knight gasped and wondered if a comet had fallen from the sky, but another immediately shouted that the opposite had happened, and that something had instead launched upward. Watching from a distance, Alphine heard the commotion and instantly recognized the energy being described. Despite the vague explanation, she knew without a doubt that the source of the disturbance was Aster himself. Inside the forest, Aster collapsed onto the ground in complete exhaustion while still wearing a smile filled with amazement. He breathlessly admitted that the sword was truly extraordinary. The Viscount looked toward his son with both awe and seriousness before explaining that the truly remarkable thing was not the weapon itself, but the overwhelming power sleeping within Aster. With a grave expression, he revealed that throughout the entire history of the Elmhine family, not a single person had ever possessed a 7-winged emblem before him. The Viscount assured Aster that if he could someday fully master that power, he would become a swordsman far superior to 6-winged warriors such as himself, and even Roderick Elmhine. The image of Roderick flashed through Aster's mind, and the desire to surpass him ignited a burning determination. However, his father warned him that such overwhelming power would always attract conflict. As Aster tightened his grip around the hilt, the Viscount explained that if others discovered he possessed 7 wings, the emblems shining across his back like a beacon, many would envy him, while others would seek to destroy him like shadows dragging him into darkness. Some would try to manipulate him through schemes, while others would see him as a threat that needed to be eliminated. Reaching out his hand, the Viscount urged him to master his power so that when the decisive moment arrived, he would not regret his own helplessness. With unwavering conviction, he encouraged his adoptive son to grow stronger. Aster accepted his father's hand, his heart filled with gratitude, and silently swore that he would never again live the miserable life he once endured. Looking directly into his father's eyes, he sincerely thanked him, and vowed that he would master the 7 wings no matter the cost. 3 days later, the Viscount and his wife waited in the grand hall to welcome home their returning daughters. 2 young baddies showed up, one with short red hair and a fierce expression, while the other had long white hair and a gentle smile. The red-haired girl proudly announced that Kudravka had returned. After clearing her throat, she spread her arms wide with a bright grin and invited her younger sisters to embrace her. Instead, the two girls rushed straight toward the white-haired sister Malfa, happily welcoming her home and leaving Kudo standing alone in the center of the hall. Blinking in confusion, Kudo wondered why nobody was hugging her. The younger girls explained while clinging to Malfa that Kudo always ruined their hair. Crossing her arms in annoyance, Kudo denied the accusation and insisted that she had perfectly mastered a knight's etiquette and would never act improperly. However, her serious facade immediately collapsed the moment she spotted her sister Alphine. With an excited shout, she rushed forward and wrapped her in a crushing embrace, nearly suffocating her while asking if she had behaved well during her absence. Alphine struggled desperately to escape the overwhelming hug and demanded to know why she was being treated so roughly. Meanwhile, Kudo continued her overly enthusiastic greeting. Beside them, Malfa noticed someone was missing and asked where Aster was. The Viscount answered with a mysterious smile, simply referring to him as that boy. Instantly, Kudo's expression changed from cheerful warmth to serious focus. Deep within the forest, a violent pillar of red energy erupted from Aster's sword. He struggled desperately to control the overwhelming force, repeatedly leaping and swinging the blade in an attempt to subdue it. Eventually, he collapsed to his knees, exhausted and drenched in sweat, cursing his inability to fully master the weapon while remaining unaware that his sister was already searching for him. A single strand of his hair had turned white from the strain. Although he could create a blade through magic, suppressing the sword's true power consumed nearly all of his strength. The forest clearing around him was scarred with craters, clear evidence of his struggle to control the gram, making him wonder how his father wielded it so effortlessly. Suddenly, a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts and teased him for pushing himself so hard again. Startled, Aster turned toward his sister Kudo and asked when she had returned. Wearing a playful yet sharp smile, she scolded him for failing to welcome his older sister home. Raising an eyebrow, she questioned whether he believed himself so important that his family no longer mattered. She mentioned hearing about the sword dance and explained that the Knight Academy was filled with rumors about him, adding that their father must be proud. Aster brushed aside the praise and insisted that she was the truly impressive one. He pointed out that even as an apprentice, she had distinguished herself through numerous missions. Continuing to praise her achievements, he mentioned hearing that she had become the only knight to receive the Medal of Honor that year. Kudo responded indifferently and remarked that if she could not achieve at least that much, she would never inherit their father's position. Fixing him with a steady gaze, she directly asked whether he had rejected the offer to become heir for her sake. Aster sighed and complained that their father should never have told her, explaining that he simply did not consider himself qualified yet. Kudo lowered her gaze thoughtfully before turning away and walking deeper into the forest. Bitterly, she complained that both their father and Aster were cruel because they knew inheriting the position had always been her dream, yet they still offered it to him. Her figure slowly disappeared among the trees, leaving Aster confused by her sudden shift in mood. Without warning, she spun around and unleashed a powerful slash of blue energy directly toward him. The attack sliced a tree in half as though it were nothing, forcing Aster to dodge at the last second. The massive trunk crashed beside him, making him leap backward to avoid being crushed. After landing lightly, he demanded to know what she was suddenly doing. Surrounded by a blazing aura of power, Kudo declared with a challenging smile that she would finally test him after all this time. Resting her sword on her shoulder, she warned him that she would no longer hold back. Panic flashed across Aster's face as he pleaded for her to wait, explaining that his sword was still incomplete. In response, Kudo questioned whether he could use the same excuse against an enemy on the battlefield. The word enemy echoed through Aster's mind, forcing him to realize the situation. Taking a combat stance, Kudo reminded him that a knight must always remain prepared for battle, and warned that if he continued holding back, she would crush him. Her first strike was so powerful that he barely managed to evade it. Realizing she was completely serious, he understood that he had no choice left. Driven by desperation, he unleashed the crimson power of Gram. Red energy from his blade collided violently against the blue aura surrounding Kudo, and a terrifying realization crossed his mind. She truly intended to kill him. Their battle raged deeper into the forest, far from prying eyes. From a distance, it looked as though lightning itself had descended among the trees, as bursts of light flashed endlessly. Clicking her tongue mid-swing, Kudo sliced through the air with merciless precision and admitted that Aster remained exceptionally skilled with the sword. She confessed that she had never expected him to keep pace with her after all the growth she had achieved at the Knight Academy. Even so, Aster continued blocking her relentless strikes one after another, until Kudo twisted her stance and unleashed a crushing blow that hurled him backward. Coldly, she declared that his control over mana was pathetic. Aster slid across the ground, his boots carving deep grooves into the soil. Yet, despite the overwhelming pressure, he forced himself to remain standing. Looking up at her, he remarked that she was just as merciless as he remembered. His thoughts drifted unwillingly to the past. Kudo had always been fierce, confrontational, and unyielding. As the only man in the family with the formal right to inherit and the bearer of the seven-winged crest, he stood above everyone else in the household. To her, his very existence had always been unfair. He had remained a silent thorn in her life for as long as she could remember. Over time, she grew into a storm that challenged every injustice placed before her, making her his natural enemy. Suddenly, she leapt high into the air, and for a brief instant, Aster saw her silhouette rise above the forest canopy. He immediately understood what was coming next. Her sword descended like judgment itself, crashing into the earth with terrifying force. The impact split the forest floor apart as a violent shockwave erupted outward. Standing above him, she declared that he was unworthy of becoming the next head of the family. Elsewhere, inside their father's chamber, Alpine stood beside the window, her voice filled with concern as she questioned whether it was truly wise to allow the two of them to fight alone. She feared that a reckless clash between siblings could easily end in death. Their father answered calmly that Aster and Kudo were rivals, reckless perhaps, but not foolish enough to cross that final line. Though still uneasy, Alpine pressed further, asking why they had truly been summoned back from the Night Academy. She sensed the matter involved more than simple succession. Their father quietly opened a drawer and withdrew a sealed envelope, bearing the insignia of the Elmheim Main family. The sight stole her breath away. He explained that it was a summons from the elders who governed the family's core. They wished to meet their grandchild personally. When Alpine quietly questioned whether the situation was truly that serious, he answered without hesitation that, at worst, they could lose Aster entirely. Back in the forest, the battle showed no sign of slowing. Their blades clashed repeatedly, shockwaves rippling through the trees like the heartbeat of destruction itself. Amid the exchange, Aster told Kudo to stop speaking nonsense and reminded her that he had already rejected the position of successor. He insisted that she understood that better than anyone else. Irritation twisted across her face as she raised her sword high into the air, declaring that his refusal was exactly what she found unacceptable. Her blade crashed downward with overwhelming force. Aster barely blocked the strike in time, and the sheer weight behind it stunned him. Facing her felt less like fighting a swordsman and more like resisting a troll swinging a massive warhammer. She pressed harder, pouring even more strength into the attack. At the final moment, Aster twisted his wrist and redirected her strike into the ground. He sharply demanded that she finally listen to him. She only gave a faint smile and asked whether he was already trying to run away. In the next instant, she unleashed her full brute strength, sending Aster flying sideways into a tree with enough force to shatter the bark behind him. He coughed blood, disbelief flashing across his eyes. Kudo looked down at him and declared that if all he could do was swing a sword, then he was merely third-rate. She explained that even warriors who relied only on mana could only reach second-rate, while true first-rate fighters mastered both swordsmanship and mana together. She admitted that she was deeply disappointed in him. The difference in wing crests, she explained, directly reflected mana capacity. Even a single additional wing represented nearly triple the power. Though she possessed only 5 wings and technically stood below his 7 in raw potential, he still avoided direct clashes of strength and instead hid behind refined technique. With a faint smile, she questioned whether he truly lacked faith in himself or whether he feared losing control again like he had 3 years ago. Her words cut deeper than steel. Aster froze as the memory resurfaced in his mind. For the first time, he began questioning whether he had unconsciously sealed away his own power out of fear from that incident. His gaze lowered toward his sword as he quietly wondered whether that suppression was the reason Kudo had always felt unstable in his grasp. Kudo's expression hardened even further. She declared that he possessed everything she had ever wanted, and if he intended to waste those blessings through ignorance and arrogance, then he should hand them over to someone who truly understood their worth. She lunged forward, her killing intent no longer restrained. This time, Aster refused to retreat. He met her full-powered strike head-on, their blades colliding with a thunderous roar that echoed throughout the forest. To Kudo's shock, she was forced backward, her footing faltering as disbelief filled her eyes. She could barely comprehend that he had deflected her attack so cleanly. Aster offered a faint smile and thanked her, explaining that because of her, he had finally awakened. Then he surged forward at full speed. Kudo narrowed her eyes in confusion, unable to understand why he would charge recklessly before stabilizing his blade. She questioned whether he had already run out of mana, though even that seemed impossible. As Aster advanced, mana flooded violently into his sword. The 7 wings on his back unleashed a vast, nearly inexhaustible reserve of power. He understood that he still lacked precise control over it, so instead of forcing restraint, he abandoned it entirely. Rather than relying on technique, he poured every ounce of mana into the pure motion of his strike. The attack descended with unstoppable force. Kudo blocked it cleanly and steadied herself immediately. Yet even then, she could feel the difference. Something inside Aster had undeniably changed. Kudo steadied herself after blocking the strike and let out an amused smile. She questioned whether he had truly thought this through or if he was simply acting on another reckless impulse. Aster met her gaze without hesitation. There was no uncertainty left within him now. He declared that he no longer intended to waste his second life. This time, he would claim everything that had once slipped through his fingers: the power of the 7 wings, the sword Gram, and even his rightful place within the family. These were all things he had desperately struggled for in the past, yet failed to obtain. At the mention of a second life, Kudo stiffened for the briefest moment as shock flickered visibly across her face. In that tiny opening, Aster moved. Mana surged violently into his blade as he crossed the distance in an instant. He leapt high into the air, gathering every ounce of power he possessed, his sword poised to descend. Then, suddenly, he vanished. Kudo's eyes widened as she lost sight of him mid-air. However, Aster had not disappeared at all. Instead, he had dropped low to the ground while compressing his mana into an even denser current. The pressure surrounding him intensified as he poured everything into the blade. He openly declared that he would no longer hold back. Kudo immediately sensed the shift as the air itself became unbearably heavy. She understood instantly that the battle was about to end. Aster brought his sword down with overwhelming force, the air screaming apart beneath the descending arc of mana. Sometime later, Kudo slowly opened her eyes, only to find herself staring at the familiar ceiling of her own room instead of the forest. For a brief moment, she could not understand how she had ended up there. Sunlight filtered through the curtains while her older sister, Manhwa, stood quietly beside the window. Manhwa turned toward her and calmly remarked that Kudo had taken quite a while to wake up. Kudo immediately pushed herself upright and sharply demanded to know what had happened to the duel and who had won. Manhwa smiled gently and explained that Aster had personally carried her back. He had told everyone that Kudo simply fell asleep in the middle of the fight because the exhaustion from returning from the Night Academy had finally overwhelmed her. Kudo lowered her gaze toward her sword in silence. She knew that explanation was false. She remembered the final moment clearly. Aster's blade had stopped only inches away from her body. She had felt the crushing pressure of his mana, powerful enough to split her apart. Yet just before the strike connected, he dispersed the mana surrounding the blade. Only the remaining shockwave brushed against her, knocking her unconscious. In that instant, she realized something simple and undeniable. No matter what he claimed, Aster would never kill his own sister, and yet, for a brief heartbeat, she had truly believed he might. A faint smile touched her lips. Despite being younger than her, he had grown into someone overwhelmingly formidable. What an unbearable little brother he had become. She rose abruptly while gripping her sword and asked Manhwa where Aster had gone. She declared that she would never accept a duel ending in such a way, and insisted that the next battle would begin with both of them fighting seriously from the start. Manhwa's expression shifted slightly as she explained that Aster had already left the castle. Kudo froze where she stood. Manhwa continued by explaining that the main house had summoned him, and earlier that day, he had departed alongside their father. Seeing the confusion on Kudo's face, she questioned whether Kudo truly had not known about the summons. Anger immediately rose within Kudo as she demanded to know why nobody had informed her about it. Meanwhile, a horse-drawn carriage rolled steadily along the forest road beyond the castle grounds. Inside, Aster sat silently across from his father. His father explained that the person Aster was about to meet was one of the old lords who secretly supported the Elmheim family. Although those figures had long stepped down from public leadership, the former heads of both the main and branch families, along with the powerful elders beneath them, still possessed overwhelming authority. They no longer stood beneath the spotlight, but instead ruled quietly from the shadows. He added that those elders had never once shown any interest in Aster after his adoption, so for them to summon him now was far from trivial. Aster listened calmly and replied that it was most likely related to the sword dance assembly. He mentioned hearing that the elders of Elmheim valued the family's honor above everything else, above gold and even above life itself. According to the rumors, anyone who stained that honor would be thrown into beast cages as feed. His father stared at him in disbelief and demanded to know where he had heard such an absurd story. Slightly flustered, Aster answered that he had heard it somewhere long ago. Then, in a steadier tone, he declared that he was prepared for whatever awaited him, whether punishment or exile. After a brief silence, his father asked whether it truly did not bother him to leave without saying goodbye to Kudo. Aster smiled faintly and replied that it was fine since their departures had been scheduled around the same time anyway. He believed that because Kudo disliked him, she would probably feel more comfortable in his absence. He also admitted that thanks to her, he had finally begun understanding how to properly wield the sword Graham. He could now draw out the power of the 7 wings more freely than before. With steady eyes, he told his father not to come rescue him no matter what happened next, because he was prepared to survive on his own. His father opened his mouth, clearly intending to scold him for such reckless words. But before he could speak, a voice rang out from outside the carriage, questioning why Aster was acting so dramatic, despite being the youngest among them. Aster's eyes widened in shock. Clinging to the side of the moving carriage was Kudo herself. Her sharp expression burned with stubborn determination as she glared directly at him. Without hesitation, she climbed into the moving carriage as though the journey ahead had always included her. The moment she stepped inside, she immediately turned toward Aster and demanded to know why he had slipped away without saying a single word to his older sister. Her voice carried both anger and disbelief. She added that she had heard about the summons from the elders of the main house, something that sounded less like an honor and more like a threat, especially since neither she nor Manhwa had ever received such treatment before. Hyfryd immediately interrupted, firmly reminding her that she could not accompany them to the main house because the matter was too sensitive and dangerous. However, Kudo calmly sat beside Aster and explained that she already understood the situation. She knew their father had called both her and Manhwa back from the Night Academy to guard the estate during his absence. She insisted that she was not foolish enough to overlook such an obvious implication. Still, her expression hardened as she warned that a summons from the main house meant the situation was extremely serious. Manhwa herself had warned there was a real chance Aster might never return. Aster brushed the concern aside with a calm smile and claimed he was merely going there to talk before returning soon after. Yet deep down, he understood that his safe return was far from guaranteed. Suddenly, Kudo pointed directly at him and ordered him to listen carefully. Without softening her words, she openly admitted that she hated him. Aster blinked in surprise, but Kudo continued without hesitation. She hated that he was a man in a family where that alone granted advantages. She hated that he possessed 7 wings. She hated that he was constantly treated as someone special. She hated that he was stronger than his older sisters. She hated that despite being the youngest, he always carried himself with unnatural maturity. She hated every bit of it. Then her voice slowly softened. No matter how unfair those things felt to her, he was still family. No matter how strong or composed he acted, he was still her little brother. Rising proudly to her feet, she ordered him to return safely so they could properly settle their duel next time. This time, they would begin at full power from the very start. A faint smile curved across her lips, as she added that she would never allow him to escape with such a cheap victory. And with that, she leapt effortlessly from the moving carriage just as suddenly as she had appeared. Startled, Aster quickly leaned outside the carriage and questioned his father about why she had gone through all that trouble just to say those things. Hyfryd watched Kudo's shrinking figure with pride in his eyes and replied that it sounded like a proper farewell to him. A quiet smile appeared on Aster's lips. As he looked back once more, he saw Kudo standing boldly on the road behind them, watching the departing carriage without hesitation. Silently, he thanked her and made himself a firm promise that no matter what awaited him at the main house, he would return alive. Sometime later, Viscount Hyfryd and Aster finally arrived at the main residence of the Elmheim family. The moment they stepped onto the estate grounds, a team of guides moved to receive them. Their captain greeted them formally and announced that the Grand Elder was already waiting inside. Hearing this, Viscount Hyfryd calmly replied that there was no need for a guide because he already knew the way. However, the captain firmly refused and explained that they had been given strict orders to escort both of them personally. From the atmosphere alone, Aster immediately realized that they had not been summoned out of simple familial affection. The tension in the air felt stiff, deliberate, and oppressive. Even so, as Aster's gaze drifted across the familiar surroundings, a faint sense of nostalgia washed over him. He quietly reflected that it had been a long time since he had last returned home. His eyes lingered on the estate as old memories resurfaced, though he said nothing aloud. With no other choice, they proceeded deeper into the residence alongside the guides. As they walked, Viscount Hyfryd spoke in a low but serious tone, warning Aster not to lose his temper no matter what happened today. Aster listened before calmly replying that his actions would depend entirely on how the other side behaved. His father let out a slight sigh and explained that the other side itself was the real problem. He began warning Aster about the person they were about to meet, but before he could finish, Aster casually interrupted while still looking elsewhere. He remarked that Dallas was nowhere to be seen and guessed that returning anytime soon would be difficult after having his dominant hand crushed. Viscount Hyfryd shot him a sharp look and demanded to know whether he was even listening. Pulling himself back from his thoughts, Aster simply answered that he was. He then calmly added that he intended to remain as silent as a clam today, since Kudo had ordered him to return safely. By then, they had reached a massive door. It slowly creaked open, the heavy sound echoing throughout the corridor. As they stepped inside, the captain of the guards formally announced the arrival of Lord Hyfryd and his son. Seated at the far end of the grand hall, an elderly figure spoke in a measured voice, remarking that more than 10 years had already passed. Father and son moved forward together, while another amused voice quietly commented about Hyfryd's grandson. Viscount Hyfryd immediately dropped to his knees and bowed deeply in full respect, greeting the 6th head and great-grand elder after such a long absence. Aster, meanwhile, maintained his composure. As he felt the overwhelming weight of the elder's gaze upon him, he silently recognized the man before him as the true monster lurking within the shadows of Elmheim the 6th head, Zenith Elmheim. Around the elder sat the true heavyweights of the family, figures possessing immense authority and influence. Among them were several faces Aster recognized from the Sword Dance Festival. His eyes briefly swept across the hall before he casually asked whether Roderick was absent. A flicker of surprise crossed the room, but before anyone else could answer, the 6th head sharply replied that Roderick was not present because he served directly as the leader of the Royal Knights and had no time to involve himself in vulgar matters. Then, suddenly, a terrifying aura poured from the elder's body, pressing down upon the entire hall like an invisible force. His mere presence alone felt enough to dominate everyone in the room, as he coldly explained that since Roderick had no time for such vulgar matters, the old soldiers were handling the administrative duties instead. Aster remained outwardly calm, though his thoughts quietly moved beneath the surface. He reflected that in his previous life, he had never even been granted the opportunity to meet these people. Yet now, seeing so many executives gathered without the current head present, he realized just how overwhelming the 6th head's influence truly was, even in retirement. Finally, Count Hyfryd spoke in a controlled but firm voice and questioned what exactly these so-called vulgar matters were. Zenith Elmheim let out a low laugh before replying that Hyfryd had already guessed the answer. His sharp gaze shifted toward Aster as he remarked that Hyfryd's pet dog had caused quite a disturbance during the Sword Dance Festival. Viscount Hyfryd calmly responded that the current head, Roderick, had already resolved the matter and officially closed the case. However, the elder immediately dismissed that argument and coldly declared that the public resolution had merely been a performance. It does not change the fact that the Elmheim family's reputation had already been tarnished. The elder declared that adopting a child of unknown origin had been a mistake from the very beginning. He added that they would have ignored the matter if the boy had remained harmless. However, everything changed the moment he dared to bare his fangs at the main house. According to him, there was now no choice left but banishment. At that instant, an overwhelming killing intent flooded the hall, far more intense than before. The pressure became suffocating as it bore down on everyone mercilessly. The sixth head continued while keeping his gaze fixed forward, warning that even the Lord would not escape proper punishment. The threat was unmistakable. After hearing everything, Aster spoke firmly, insisting that he alone was responsible and that his father had nothing to do with the situation. At that moment, Viscount Hyfrid remained silent. He neither stopped his son nor defended him aloud. Seeing his father's silence, Aster gradually calmed himself and fell quiet as well. Zenith Elmheim observed the exchange with unreadable eyes before criticizing Aster for interrupting while adults were speaking. With that, the sixth head slowly rose from his seat, and the simple movement alone made the atmosphere inside the hall feel even heavier. He then declared that they commanded 12,000 knights under the name of Elmheim. However, he explained that the knights were far from united, as countless individuals constantly competed for the highest position. His gaze swept across the gathered elders and executives, making the meaning behind his words impossible to miss. Power within Elmheim was unstable and endlessly contested. In a hall filled with ambitious figures, even the smallest stain on their reputation could become a weapon. Zenith Elmheim stepped forward once again and calmly explained that all they wanted was peace of mind and proof that Aster would not become someone who could harm Elmheim. With a simple gesture, a sword was brought before Viscount Hyfrid. The blade radiated a violent aura, its energy spilling across the hall like an uncontrollable storm. The sixth head coldly reminded Viscount Hyfrid of the time he failed to protect his leech and dragged Elmheim's name through disgrace. He recalled that Roderick had personally severed that arm within the same hall. As another crushing wave of killing intent spread through the room, the pressure became nearly unbearable. The elder then mercilessly ordered Viscount Hyfrid to cut off Aster's head if he wished for the matter to end there. The words struck the hall like a blade. Without hesitation, Viscount Hyfrid firmly refused, declaring that he would rather take his own life than kill his own child. His voice carried no fear, only unwavering resolve. Hearing those words, Aster could only whisper his father's name before falling silent, unable to continue speaking. The sixth head remained standing as his oppressive presence flooded the room without mercy. His expression remained unchanged as he calmly declared that if that was the Viscount's answer, then he, his wife, his daughters, and even Aster should all die together. The hall sank into deathly silence as the threat lingered like an executioner's blade hanging overhead. The sixth head then announced that, starting from that very day, the Viscount house would be dissolved. The declaration felt like a final judgment. At once, numerous knights surged forward to carry out the order. Steel flashed throughout the hall as they surrounded Viscount Hyfrid with drawn swords, their killing intent fully unleashed. Seeing his father encircled from every direction, Aster stepped forward and questioned why the Grand Elder was so afraid. Zenith Elmheim narrowed his eyes in confusion, but Aster did not back down. Keeping his golden gaze steady, he mocked the elders by saying that if they were truly frightened of being bitten by a mere pet dog, then a group of grown adults trembling together like this was pathetic. The hall fell silent, stunned by his audacity. Aster continued by saying that they could banish or execute him if they wished, but if they intended to harm his family, things would be different. As he spoke, he began removing his shirt without hesitation. Viscount Hyfrid silently watched, fully aware of what his son intended to reveal. Before facing the elders once more, Aster softly apologized to his father, admitting that he was never very good at remaining silent. A nearby knight stared in shock before blurting out a question about the emblem on Aster's back. Aster stood tall, revealing the mark clearly for everyone to see. He then declared before the entire chamber that those 7 wings would one day become Elmheim's enemy and warned them to think carefully about their decision.